Hey, everybody. I hope you're having a great Friday. Thanks for coming along. We're going to have a nice conversation here. I'm joined by Ian. Ian, how are you?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm doing great. It's not bad for a Friday. I expected to be down in San Diego today, but things have changed.
The world has changed, to borrow a Lord of the Rings quote.
Yes, it is not the same place it was this time last year. That's for sure. It seems like every week we get a new surprise with it.
And
But
so many of the surprises are just not making it better, I feel.
No, they're not happy surprises. And I would have expected we'd have our feet under us and we'd be making some progress forward by now. But that's just it hasn't kicked in yet. We keep everybody keeps like they're still reacting from a bad place.
I feel like the lockdown and the social isolation stuff has really, it could have brought us together, but it hasn't,
You're absolutely right. I think it had the potential to be a rallying moment, like we've seen for disasters in the past. But if anything, it just entrenched, kind of the divide further. It did the opposite of what it's normally done, and maybe that's why people are so much on kind of off footing. So.
Yeah, and I feel like, I remember 9/11, and we had about 2 to 3 years of people, we had problems back then, but people tried to work together, I feel. And I feel like from the moment the shutdown happened, people weren't working together. And that's been magnified in the comics community, is just sniping and drama and immaturity.
It's true. No, and so it has been a day, like we were talking about right before we were on. And to answer a question, I was planning on being at the Comic-Con as an attendee or a guest, not a vendor. I wouldn't vend at Comic-Con. It's a zoo to vend there. I mean, it's hard enough to do the Emerald City Con here in Seattle. But obviously not there. And for this first day with the Comic-Con, it's often a slower news day on Friday, but still the headlines are all going into this variant cover, which is not the news headline I was hoping would lead the Comic-Con's start.
Well, and all the drama seemed like it was people who are agreeing with what Tom King said, and they're like trying to pressure Tom King, and Tom King's already like, yeah, I'm on your side. And it just seems like everyone's so quick to judge that there's friendly fire. And
yeah, it seems wasteful. Like I just don't know. I always think the strategy of this stuff. So regardless of kind of what side you fall on or the people or any of that, it's like, what does any of this benefit? And I'm struggling. I kind of like the dynamite thing last weekend. I'm struggling to see who benefits from any of this, other than the people that they say they dislike. In the Comicsgate side, they will fundraise off this and they'll make more money. So if there's any outcome of this, it just feels like more people make money.
It really feels frustrating to me because Jay Lee is clearly a big Dynamite guy right now. He's doing pages and covers for Christopher Priest's Sacred Six series. And so this is just going to make that Dynamite thing go longer. And as you said really well in your video about Dynamite, who won? Absolutely no one won. I mean, yes, they're going to fundraise off of this, but they didn't get more social cohesion. There's still there's still so much infighting in Comicsgate that it's not really helping anything.
I don't think so. And right now, with just places to work, I talked to a lot of different creators, people who are looking to, I mean, their hope is to get more secure jobs, to get higher page rates, to get more projects. And we don't really have publishers to spare. IDW is kind of on the ropes, and a lot of the smaller guys aren't moving up very quickly. We don't have like just a spare publisher we can shoot in the head. And Dynamite, I mean, this hurts them. It hurts projects. It overall, this just seems subtractive. So I don't really get how anybody benefits out of this. And long term, anyways, it was disappointing. It was like deja vu. Last week we had some outrage about a variant cover, and here we go. It's 1 week later, and we're right back to variant cover outrage. I'm tired of it. I'm ready for a new episode in this arc.
Yeah. It makes me think. I was tweeting, I think a couple days ago, about the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman, because the Audible audio drama just came out, and I've been listening to that and remembering that even though it's a very dark work and it's often controversial, there's an episode that I just listened to that almost encourages suicide, which is, definitely something people wouldn't be in favor of today, but I think it explores it in a complicated way. It feels wrong to say I don't approve of it, but I don't approve of it. I don't approve of suicide.
Sure.
But
you have to say that, but yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, but I was thinking Sandman, right after Sandman ended in 96, there was a bunch of spin-off comics like The Dreaming and Lucifer, and it's gotten adapted in this radio drama, and it's getting a Netflix series, and it has this new line that started in 2018. And I'm thinking, what is the Sandman? 20 years ago, so Sandman's about 30 years ago. 20 years ago, you had Fables, you had The Boys. Both of those are big properties that have had a lot of spin-offs and adaptations. What's our 10-year ago Sandman? Like, someone suggested Wicked and Divine and Saga, but neither of those have had spin-offs. They're very popular, but they haven't really...
Yeah, they're not going to grow. They're pretty limited. I think now we'll see. I think there's very little doubt in my mind that those two will spin off to things outside of comics. I think we'll get some television adaptations. Netflix will pick one of them up. Something like that will happen. But yeah, there's not a franchise being built right now. There's not a new big franchise. Walking Dead was probably the last one that had that potential, but even that's wrapped up. So I don't know. There's not really kind of one on the horizon that I mean, but the talent is there. I think they will come, but they need places to go. They need stable publishers to print this stuff, and they need to be able to promote it, and that's going to be a trick.
Well, and how did Sandman get so big? Because it's the kind of title that you wouldn't necessarily think of as becoming. It's basically an indie horror fantasy novel,
Yeah, I think it was kind of because I remember because I'm old because selling that thing. It was the right book at the right time to some extent. It did fit a niche in comics that was not being served in the 90s. That was very much. The 90s had moved into. There's got to be a better description, but almost like Michael Bay's style action. Style, less substance. Was a lot of
pouches and muscles.
Yeah, exactly. Pouches and muscles, and.
And that's not to say there aren't great 90s comics.
There's plenty. Yeah.
But it was a very distinctive trend.
Yes, it was. And too many titles went all in on it. Some of that stuff worked for, say, X-Men, but you didn't really want to see that as Superman's motif. It didn't fit certain characters. But so Sandman came in, it was almost like counter programming. It was very different. And so if you're picking up comics at the time and you weren't excited about Guns and Pouches, then here was a book that was going to be for you. And it worked. It was comic publishers were doing a slightly better job, I think, back then. The indies were around finding, unserved niches of entertainment and putting comics there. I think that's kind of gone away a little bit. We've gone back into kind of a collective, but.
Yeah. I see George Travelos mentioning that the newest Sandman universe relaunch was horrendous, and he loved the original series, and the uniqueness of Sandman was definitely a factor. Mm-hmm. I've only read a couple issues of the relaunch. I love the art by Bilquis Evely, but the only one I really read much of was The Dreaming, and I felt that was really hammer in your face, unsubtle, whereas Gaiman, even though he definitely has his political and his philosophical beliefs, he's willing to step back from them and really sort of examine the flaws in his own beliefs. Whereas I feel Cy Spurrier in The Dreaming is just I'm right, and everyone who disagrees with me is this evil person, and he just murders everyone he doesn't like, so he's evil.
Yeah, it's not. It feels. It doesn't have the same depth to it. I agree. And the new series was. It felt like a greatest hits version of this. It didn't feel like a solid story. It just felt like somebody kind of going through the motions.
And I'm actually intrigued by what Willow Wilson's about to start doing in August with Waking Hours, because she has this sort of Romeo and Juliet nightmare falling in love with a human type thing, which I think actually is an interesting idea. Whereas this, Cy Spurrier is like, what is the dreaming like without Sandman? That's not like a super interesting concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and it's one of those dangers of you get a property that's really popular, you don't completely know why, and you come back to it, you want to cash in on that brand. I think the same thing is somewhat true of what they're doing with Watchmen right now. It's trying to recreate that, but it does not have the same energy. And in some cases, these books have a story to tell. They tell it, and then they're done. They don't need to come back for more. There's a limited set of things you can do with it.
Well, it's an interesting thing that you mentioned Watchmen, because I'm one of the weird people who actually doesn't like the original Watchmen. Like I admire it, but I don't enjoy it. And I found what Darwin Cook did in Minutemen and before Watchmen much more interesting, partly because I just like Darwin Cook's art and writing a lot.
That was a great joke, yeah.
But I think it's really disappointing. I mean, it's sort of the Terminator effect. If you look at, you had the first 2 Terminator movies by James Cameron, and then every single movie after that is by a different creative team, and all of them ignore the last one. So they're all their own universe. And so what's the point of watching them in order? Because they don't build on each other. I think the same thing's happening with Watchmen, because you had before Watchmen, and that was a thing. And first you had the movie, and then you had before Watchmen. Then you had Doomsday Clock, and then you had the HBO series. And maybe Tom King's building on the HBO series. That's sort of what he's seeming to hint at. But it feels like everything's ignoring what other people have done, and that doesn't seem like a successful strategy to me.
No, it doesn't. I don't think the book. I mean, you can kind of do some of that stuff with Batman or Superman or the core characters, like you have the Elseworlds book where you explore kind of completely different continuities and all that. But Watchmen was so specific in what it did, and it doesn't have the volume of books. I mean, Superman has hundreds and hundreds of titles as a platform that you can build off of and grow from, and Watchmen has 12. So it's just not. It's not as easy to pull that off. I don't know. So I was surprised, and I see some questions we should get to, but the news today, and it's a tease, so it may not come out, that the detective that's investigating Rorschach in Tom King's series is, Tom King said it's who you think it is. It's somebody we all know, with the hint that it's Batman. So that's a weird twist. I mean, did you hear that news? And what do you think about that?
I heard that he said that, and I feel like making it Batman feels too easy. And as much as I'm not excited about this Rorschach series, which we can get into if you want, but I'm just basically not excited, even though anyone who's paid attention to your comment section knows I'm a huge Tom King fan on Batman. Mm-hmm. I feel like that.
I appreciate that you hold your ground. I think definitely the temper is against Tom King on Batman, and I appreciate that you just stay firm with what you like.
And I'm perfectly willing to admit that the run has flaws, and I would be happy to acknowledge where I think the specific flaws are. Mm-hmm. But I think overall, for me, it just really worked. But I think putting Batman in that universe, as much as I didn't think Doomsday Clock actually said anything in the end, mm-hmm. I think the idea was absolutely sound. The idea of the Dark Age, Alan Moore's nihilism and despair in the face of what he perceived as, political tyranny. I, of course, would disagree, but, that's just sort of the way he thought and still thinks. Versus mm-hmm. Superman, who is, optimism and hope and the world. And I don't think that Johns really said anything other than hope wins. He didn't really explain to me how hope wins. But I think that it is a very worthwhile meta concept. And I feel like putting Batman in the Watchmen, Batman's already, really struggling with hope. So putting him against an even more hopeless character doesn't seem to provide enough contrast to be interesting conceptually.
I think that's well said. I think that's a good analysis. And also I think, Tom King's writing, it works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. But if you're thinking about really being able to draw a comparison between hope and kind of hopelessness or some of these themes, I think that plays to a weakness of King. I think he has different strengths in how he writes. I think if I was going to try and draw a really kind of interesting contrast between the two, he wouldn't be the writer I'd pick to run that particular angle. But but we'll see. And we may have it wrong. It's just that tease kind of came out of left field as the news that came out this morning. So I'm still struggling with the idea that it's Batman in that book. But
I think it would be more interesting if he had it be the question.
Totally would be more interesting. I think that would be very smart to do the question.
Yeah, because you'd have that O'Neill Zen versus Rorschach's black and white objectivism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would actually be really subtle. And I actually think Tom King could do a good job with that. I just think that Batman isn't quite thematically deep enough to, and that's not to say he can't be, but Batman is largely an archetype, a symbol. And I think Rorschach is very much a very different kind of character.
It's going to be a weird mix. So we'll see how it plays out. I think, I think on a couple fronts, DC may be overestimating a little bit the interest in Watchmen. I think the HBO series did well. It didn't do amazingly well, but it was very successful. I mean, it wasn't their number one show, but not everything needs to be. It did well. But it was also on during a period where there wasn't a ton of content out there. And so I think that, and there's a lot of hype going into it. So I don't know that it's necessarily the slam dunk people think it is, but I guess we'll see when it comes out. By the way, George, so a couple of questions here. And it's a good question for you too, Ian. What do you like about attending conventions? I think for me, this really depends on the vibe of the convention. Different conventions have different kind of feels to them. And sometimes they're really good for creators. I think the Emerald City Comic-Con here in Seattle has been a pretty good one for meeting creators. It's a pretty terrible one for panels, in my opinion. I think that, the New York City Comic-Con kind of has different years, different zones where it goes to. The San Diego Comic-Con is good for meeting up with creators or friends or other retailers after the show. I actually find wandering the floor at San Diego to be pretty painful. It just sucks the life right out of you, and it's a overcrowded zoo. But the evening events are pretty good as long as they're not turning into complete insanity. What about you? You've been to some conventions. What do you like best about it?
Yeah, I've actually only been to 3 different conventions, and I've been to most of those multiple times. I've been to Baltimore Comic Con, I've been to AwesomeCon in DC, and I've been to, I think it was actually AwesomeCon in Minneapolis, where I currently live. And I honestly, as I said, I don't go to panels. I listened to one panel. I didn't enjoy it very much. But I like just walking up and talking to a creator. And it's nice. I feel kind of sad for them if I'm the only one there, but I'm kind of happy because I could just sit for half an hour and just talk their ear off. I had a great experience with Elisa Quitney, who wrote Convergence Batgirl. And I didn't know this at the time, but she was the editor of Sandman. I should have asked her about that. I got to talk to Christopher Priest while he was taking his lunch break, which was one of the highlights of my life. He's such a great guy and so friendly and loves just saying outrageous things about his stuff and how his upcoming stuff is going. And then, of course, I love meeting Tom King and James Tynion and who are the other ones? Dustin Nguyen, just lots of the famous creators. And so many of them are just so warm and friendly and really appreciative of you as a fan. They know that you're here because they touch something in you and they appreciate that.
Yeah. I think you can get those runs, and I think it's positive for a lot of people who may be discouraged by what they see on Twitter or social media. It is helpful to go to a con and kind of interact with some of these people because it does give you another perspective. There's some people who take some real hits and I think are awkward on social media that wind up being very friendly, very nice in person, and just good solid people. And so having that other perspective about them, it helps. It helps, keep you from feeling completely distressed by what's going on. And then there's a handful. There's some people who definitely are antisocial and not the best, but you can wind up having some good interactions. Definitely this suggestion here from Brandon about flooring it Thursday. Yeah, that's the day. I think Saturday, a lot of people show up and they try and floor it on Saturday and Sunday in San Diego, and it's like it's brutal. It's an exercise in just survival at that point, and a lot of the cons are turning that way. Unfortunately, I can't imagine we're going to get when do you predict we're going to get another live con? I don't think it's coming.
Not till next year at the very earliest.
Yeah,
I think any dreams that people have of cons in the fall or the winter are just. I think people are talking about the wave of disease that we're having now. I think that it's going to be dwarfed by what happens when people have to go back inside.
Yeah.
In the winter. I think we're just going to have a lot more infection, and people are going to have normal sickness. I mean, the flu hasn't gone anywhere. People are going to be sick this fall. And I think that con organizers are going to look at that and say, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I really think we're looking at, I wouldn't be surprised if San Diego was the first one to roll out next year. So this time next year is our first real con. I mean, Seattle is still kind of holding on to hope that there's going to be some kind of Emerald City Comic Con in the fall or something, but it's not happening this year. I'd be shocked. I don't think New York City Comic Con is going to be live. I think we're in this for a while, and kind of like I think we were saying before we went on the air, it's painful to me. I watch these panels now of Zoom rooms, and they're just, I don't know, maybe it's just me. They just feel so obnoxious. I can't, even if they're saying nice things, I do not want to see the person's living room and kind of their face crammed up on the screen. It's like, it's painful to me.
It's a different world. And I think that I think we're all sort of awkwardly jumping into it. There's no real knowledge of how to present. I mean, there's a reason I have turned off my screen, because I don't want people to see all the stairs and doors and stuff behind me.
Sure. Yeah. It takes something away from it, and it's just not. I don't know. In many cases, I wish some of these cons were just done with the icons, kind of like we're doing now. I'd rather not see their face. It sounds weird, but I just would rather have the focus be on the books, put something interesting, narrate over it. But it is. We're in it for a while. Definitely. I think, no New York City Comic Con for sure, and
no.
The one in Chicago won't happen. I don't see this until maybe summer of next year.
Yeah, I agree. And I saw someone in the chat, Brandon Perlo, said in 2022, and George Travalos also said that.
Yeah.
I think 2022 is a reasonable speculation. I think it's quite possible that it won't be done until then. I think that some people might get optimistic and try it, and maybe there'll be Dragon Con is notorious for being, the con crud, because people party and drink and do drugs and hook up at that con like crazy. So I think there might be a con that tries it next year, and then just con cred is beyond absurd, and everyone else looks at it and that says no until 2022.
I agree. I think somebody will screw it up. And
I think that we have a lot of people screwing up right now, so we know someone's going to screw it up.
Yeah, I don't see it. It's just going to be a mess. And I think it'll be interesting to see how some of these companies adapt to just changing their method. I think if you're a smaller publisher and you spend this time maybe with some people who are media savvy, and you really figure out how to use these tools, and you don't think about it as one event, but maybe you think about it as a once a week stream like this, but you come prepared and you have some things to show, and you have some narration, and you kind of come all across looking professional. For a lot of smaller publishers, you may look at that and go, this is a way better return on investment than what I was doing by going to the cons at all. And so I think when they do start to come back, I think we're going to get a different con. I don't think we're going to get a same con like we have had in years past anywhere at this point.
Well, that reminds me of what you've said a long time ago in your videos about how a lot of publishers judge their audience by the cons. And I would agree with what you said, which is that's absurd. Those aren't the people who are buying it. I wish they would spend the money and send their editors around the country just to visit LCS on Wednesdays, Say you have to visit 10 LCSs throughout the year that are not in your home state, and just talk to customers on Wednesdays. And I feel like they would have so much a better thumb on what people wanted from that,
Yeah, I do too. I kind of wonder if there's a world where, a publisher goes, they take a very lightweight camera crew. You don't need much. And
just
you just
phone, really.
Yeah, for this maybe a little bit more, but not much more. Go to a comic shop once a week. Work with whoever the owner is or the manager. Set up shop. Do a little interview with people in the shop. Have some lightweight crowd interaction, but you can manage it and control it. So you have the distancing, everything else, and just make a show out of it. If you're a Boom or an Aftershock or a Vault or just one of the smaller names, I think you can do this pretty easily and cheaply. You don't even have to make it all about your company, but you start to become a thought leader in the space. Nobody else is going to do it right now. And I think people are going to continue to kind of fumble around with the cons. I don't think the cons are a priority with Marvel or DC, and won't be for quite some time. So I'm hoping somebody can take it and run with it.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of like independent YouTube people will partner with their comic shops just to, get exposure for both of them. And I wish that was you have these enormous media companies, Disney and AT&T/Warner Brothers, and they're doing, as far as I can tell, nothing to actually grow their comics audience. They have these weird projects like their auditions for creators to create their own show that they highlight on DC Universe, or they have their, weekly Marvel show or DC Daily, which just folded, which shows that clearly didn't work. And I'm just, none of this stuff feels like it's actually calculated to grow. It's retention rather than growing.
Yeah. I think and it's weird because you hear them and they definitely want to grow, or they talk about wanting to grow their audience, but the actions don't reflect that. It does not feel like they're aiming in that direction at all. It's very much a status quo, kind of hold on to what we've got, but say we want something new, but you don't see the efforts there.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's peculiar. Anyway, it'll be curious to see it. Thanks for all the comments in the channel here. Thank you guys for being active and asking questions. It's awesome. We'll answer everything we can, and it is a shame. I think that there's opportunities, and hopefully a bunch of us can get together and start doing more of kind of an ongoing rolling virtual con kind of, because the interest is there. The people are here. We want to learn about comics. We want to see what's going on, get some interviews going and everything else. And it doesn't have to be this weird step. I mean, I was watching some of the panels today, and honestly, the elementary school that my daughters go to have the Zoom kind of whole dynamic down way better than these giant media companies. That seems weird.
Yeah, because they do it with feedback that they're paying attention to from the actual customers, the people who matter to them. Whereas I just don't think that DC knows how to get the feedback that matters. Or Marvel. I don't think either of them know.
Yeah.
They look at Twitter and they look at cons, and neither of those is helpful.
No, absolutely. I think, and like we talked about in the past, the cons, it is definitely an echo chamber, and you get the kind of the weirdest. In fact, in some cases, Marvel used to do this, and I think DC did too. And you'd have the questions, people would line up, but in some cases they would pre-vet the questions, and they were looking for ones that were super oddball questions. And the problem with that is the creators are all sitting up there and they're getting a very small amount of feedback, and the questions they're getting are like really strange. Like, which have you ever thought about making a character in the X-Men that it's a living tree? And you're like, the people in the audience are going, why? Who's looking for this? Nobody's looking for this. But it presents a very strange bit of feedback to the creators.
Yeah, and we have a very interesting question from George Travlos.
Yeah, what do you think? Who's somebody you'd like to meet that you've never met before?
Well, I mean, this is not living, but it's not living by just a few weeks. I really wanted to meet Denny O'Neil, and he was going to attend a con that I was signed up to go to, and then he was unable, I guess probably because of ill health, and this was a couple years ago. But I have a issue of Detective Comics Annual #1 that he wrote with Klaus Janson drawing it, and I have Janson signed it, and I really wanted O'Neil to sign it too, and just chat with him about that and what his influence on Batman was. And obviously that can't happen now.
Yeah, no, we've lost quite a few pretty key people over the last year. It's been a rough year for comics and creators, and some people who really had a lot of long-term knowledge of the industry that I don't really see getting replaced. The mentorship isn't really happening. I don't know. I've lately, I would like to meet, and I worry because she's getting older too. I'd like to meet Rumiko Takahashi.
Yeah.
I'd love to meet her. I think she's got some pretty amazing stories to tell, and is super. I mean, there's somebody who's incredibly successful.
How old is she?
I'll have to go up and look up her birthday, but she's been going for a while.
Since the early 2000s at least.
Oh, no, back in the 80s for sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But now I feel bad. I should know, but she started in 78, so she's had quite a long run. Born in 57. So yeah, I'd love to meet her. I think she has a pretty amazing story. Here in the US, you guys heard the interview I did with Brian Hill. There's a guy I'd love to have a beer with. I've never crossed paths with him in real life, but of course talked to him on the show, and I think he's a really kind guy. So there's a lot of people out there, I think, that I'd love to meet and spend some time with.
Yeah.
What do we got here? Can you go over, make a series of the economics of a comic book, how much it costs? Oh, wow. This is a question that is bigger than this chat right now. But
yeah, that's as he says, it's a series.
Yeah, I definitely can make a series on this. I'm going to take a little screenshot of this question and come back, because this would be good. I like the video I did today that I put out, which kind of lined up the extinction agenda and the Ten of Swords.
I really want to watch that, because that sounds like a really cool contrast.
Yeah, see what you. Well, I mean, I'm doing it purely from like an infographic standpoint. So let me know in the chat if you guys like that kind of concept. I'm going to do more things, but I've been preparing. It sounds so boring, but flowcharts and spreadsheets, things that can actually put some data on the screen for you. And I will cover this question and go into it in depth. It's a great one. So, yeah, there's some other stuff. Where I saw some question go flying by. This system needs a way to kind of save things. Or I always struggle with it. What's your favorite comic book superhero? Why? I suspect I know your answer to this, Ian, but who's your favorite superhero?
Well, they are on the screen. It's Stephanie Brown.
Yes, and then somebody else asked a question. What's up with the preview screen? Why is their favorite hero on the screen? And well, it's because you are coming. We put Stephanie Brown on there,
which I very much appreciate. And she's my favorite because. And I didn't realize this until a couple of years ago, but I've loved her since 2004 when she died. Spoilers. She came back.
Spoiler. Yeah.
I know, right?
I dig deep with that one. Yeah.
Because she's an outsider. She's always, held back by Batman. He says, you're not good enough. You're too impulsive. And she has to really earn her way into the role of both Robin and Batgirl. And she's always just not quite sure how to fit in to the Bat family. She's not the same kind of person, but she has the same fiery determination to be a hero, to save people and do the right thing, because her father is a villain. And my father is thankfully not a villain, but I've always really struggled with social interaction. I think a lot of nerds have that same, challenge, because we're more interested in ideas than skilled with interacting with people. It's not that we don't like people. It's that we just didn't have that inborn ability to manipulate or maneuver the unspoken cues, which is why a lot of us read so much. So I really like Stephanie Brown because she's an outsider and she keeps coming back with a positive attitude.
That's a great answer. I don't think I've ever heard you going to go into depth why you like the character before. I've known you for a couple of years now, and that's awesome. I struggle a little bit with this question. I've been asked this before, and sometimes people give recommendations. The challenge is if you've been with comics for a very long time, you find that you like more an era of a creator or a character than the character, because they keep, in many cases, refine and rewash the character and change them. I mean, I was a big fan of Storm for a long time, but they changed that character up kind of significantly. So it's hard. You have to almost quantify when you like that character and why. I've done a video on this before in the past. I like Forge as a character, kind of the X-Men, is one of those supporting characters in the X-Men that I really thought was cool, had an interesting power set, really complex backstory, lots of stuff you can do with them. I really liked a lot of those. And a lot of the characters that were coming out during that time period, I thought just had a lot of really powerful depth and everything else. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, in many cases, they rinsed and repeat and just kind of altered the characters completely. So it's hard to say that now. I think in terms of a character with a really great journey, Invincible, which benefits from the fact that it's often its own little world, they did a lot of things with that character. I mean, it did rely on shock violence at times, but in general, there was this attempt to show growth and maturity and change and taking on responsibility and losing it and bringing it back. And I thought that dynamic was, it reminded me a lot of Spider-Man and kind of the older issues in the 70s. And so I liked that was a more contemporary look at some of those old themes.
Yeah, and I think what we both said is interesting, because I think it highlights one of the questions I came in with, which is comics. Of course, there's a crossover between people who like those more independent titles, which are self-contained, and they don't have to be tied to an IP that has to stay relatively recognizable for 80 years. Mm-hmm. But what do you think about the difference between people whose primary intake and love is of the mainstream superhero stuff, and the people who are more interested in the more creator-owned and self-contained and independent stuff. Like, do those populations have more overlap than I think, or are they as distinct as I sort of conceptualize them as?
I think they do have overlap, but I think it's almost a one-way street. I think once you really kind of start to embrace more of the independent stuff, you find yourself, you find that the big mainstream hero work, it starts to resonate less with you. You seem like and I've watched this progression with people, and some people identify as just getting older, but I don't think that's the case. I think when people who do independent work, creators who own their own stuff, I mean, they benefit from they can stay true to their vision. They don't have to worry about a crossover or editorial interference or any kind of crazy thing. They can set something up, 20 issues in advance. They can basically manage it. If they're not feeling it with the story, they can pause. I mean, Saga takes long breaks. They can just say, we'll come back to it when we're ready. And that tends to lend itself to a stronger book. And so once you as a fan or you're a reader, you find something that speaks to you, you find one of those projects really works, it's very hard to then go backward and jump back into something where the characters are at the mercy of editorial directives or crossovers, or, hey, we're going to do a bold new relaunch. And so you never can fully connect again. That's my theory anyway, and why it kind of progresses that way.
That's a common narrative, that sort of maturing narrative. And I find myself not fitting it because, as I said, I mean, obviously I love the Sandman series. I've enjoyed a lot of Greg Rucka's independent stuff, like what's his current ones, Lazarus and Black Magic. And I've read some Ed Brubaker, and part of me wonders if it's not necessarily maturity so much as a taste, and that's sort of what I'm trying to get to. Because I read Kill or Be Killed by Brubaker, and I've read is it Velvet? What's the one about with Steve Epting where it's like a female James Bond?
Velvet.
Yeah, Velvet. So I've read both of those, and I described it as like the premium cable of comics. Like, it's playing with exactly the same tropes as James Bond or, Black Widow, and Kill or Be Killed is playing with the same tropes as Punisher or even Batman. But it's it doesn't feel more mature to me. It just feels more premium, more willing to be edgy and stuff. And I still love, Greg says he loves Greg Rucka's Wonder Woman. I love that too. I also love Greg Rucka's Punisher. I think he was able to say some really interesting things with that, and that was a mainstream comic. And I think that Scott Snyder and Tom King and Grant Morrison have all said very interesting things with Batman. And to some extent, that's because DC allowed Grant Morrison and Tom King and Scott Snyder to write Batman almost like an independent comic. They were runs. They had beginning, middle, and ends. And even though there was a lot of editorial interference, there was a singular vision in all three of those.
Yeah, I think that it always benefits when you can let the creator kind of have a solid pitch, you let them follow through, and you give them the time to do it. I think that's one reason why people struggle with some of the stuff that Marvel puts out. It is right now a lot of those stories and those pitches are being done on almost a arc by arc basis. There's not that feeling of longevity, and if you don't have that, you're going to pull your punches. And if you pull your punches and you're doing a big superhero kind of story, it's going to have an effect. And I think that's another reason why Donny Cates has been successful, and people like that is they're allowing him, they're committing to him for a longer run. And so he's putting in, things that 20 years ago were very standard. And so I think people look at comics today and say, I miss the old days. The new writers all suck or whatever. And maybe the skill level's different, but one thing that is definitely different is they're writing to different goals. I mean, the creators back 20, 30 years ago were all thinking about 3 to 5 year runs. I mean, they're thinking very long-term, and they're putting in that investment. And today we heard Cebulski say, I tell people to work to 6, maybe 12 issues, period. And that's really going to change the output.
And I think you can really see this in something like Matthew Rosenberg's recently concluded Hawkeye miniseries. And
sure.
I think if you look at what Rosenberg was able to do compared to what Kelly Thompson or Matt Fraction were able to do. Like or dislike what Fraction and Thompson did, both of them had a singular vision for Hawkeye, and they took it through, more than 2 or 3 years of comics.
Yeah.
And Thompson had to do that through multiple series. She started with, Hawkeye, and then she went on to West Coast Avengers. But that, honestly, it felt like West Coast Avengers was basically the continuation of her Hawkeye. So it was still sort of that singular vision for the character. Whereas Rosenberg, because of the different landscape, even just a couple years later, was told, you get a mini. If it sells well, you get some more. And I think that's...
Yeah.
I think that's really frustrating. I love minis. I think Tom King works best on minis, 12-issue miniseries. I think... Brian Hill did a great job with his Killmonger mini. I think minis can be great, but I think it's an art that a lot of writers don't have. A lot of writers need a longer run to really get that depth and that connection with the readers.
Yeah.
And I think that the current business practices are not letting that happen.
No, I think you're right, and you do see people. I think Rosenberg has suffered a little bit because he's been on a lot of titles and runs where he's never been given much of a runway beyond.
He's always been the what is it called, pinch hitter writer,
Yeah, he comes in to kind of clean up and be a filler.
Filler. It's really unfair to him.
Well, because we've seen that he can do better work, and he shills and promotes his stuff better than a lot of the writers they have there. But he's on all these short-term projects. But then you also hear a lot of stories internally of, a lot of backstabbing, a lot of stealing projects from one person to another. So in many cases, it just does not sound like a fun place to be in general.
Well, and Marvel just has so much churn. They've got, so many titles, and they're constantly swapping creative teams out and launching series and canceling after less than a year. It just feels, I don't know. I'm much more of a DC guy. I know you're more of a Marvel guy, but I feel like Marvel doesn't have a very healthy atmosphere, and it has some upsides. Marvel has a next generation, whereas DC's really struggling for new talent right now. And most of DC's new talent is poaching for Marvel.
Yeah.
But DC's much more stable in terms of being able to work there long-term. It's not stable in terms of editorial, but it's...
No, but they're doing something right on the management and curating, or kind of line management, because it comes across as more stable. Marvel feels a lot more kind of all shots in the air, and it's a perception you get off that. There's definitely a different culture that's being communicated out. And
all the events really give me this idea that, throw everything at the wall and hope it sticks.
Yeah, I'm surprised that because Marvel is nuts. I mean, when I did the October solicitations thing, I think that went out this morning. I don't remember anymore. It's shocking that you go from Empire to Ten of Swords. You've got the Last Right storyline that is a mini event. I mean, if you're adding issues to it and you're doing a little imprint, you've got yourself a little imprint. You've got an event. You've got the Outlawed thing is going. You have what's going on in the Avengers with Moon Knight. That's just a storyline, but in normal circumstances, that would be a big one that they'd be doing. Then you tie in for King in Black. I mean, that's all this year. I mean, that's an absurd amount of crossovers and events and things to track. And the reality is, they're not going to market all that stuff. They don't have the time or the budget to market all of it properly. So the big guys are going to get attention. Everything else will suffer, and the fans will tune out a lot of that. I mean, it's costing them money. It's very, very strange strategy. But anyway, it leads nicely into this question by Chris. Is it possible to pay creators and editors more? How much a regular book costs to get good talent long term? I think it's possible. I mean, anything is possible. I do think that the rates that you hear for editors who are making in the $40,000-$50,000 range living in New York is head spinning. That's just not anywhere close to the right amount of money. And the fact that they're owned by these mega corporations, that's even weirder. And if you go high up in the companies, you do get to managers and senior executives that are making, good executive salaries of, 250, 300 more base. And so there is money there. So I think it's possible.
But yeah. I think even if you look at like Dan Didio, and I think everyone who knows me knows that I am not a fan of Dan Didio, but he, at the Rebirth announcement panel in 2016, commented that there was a lot less money in comics now. And I think he was talking from his own experience. I think he came from TV. He could have been making a lot more at one of the TV companies. And I think you see a lot of comics writers leave for TV, even mid-level TV shows, because those pay better. They have better benefits. You're not a freelancer. And I think that it's an industry that needs to figure out how to grow again. It is not growing.
Yeah, it's not. And I think low money and instability drives poor behavior. And I think we see some of that. It drives short-term thinking. And I think you're seeing that with the events and kind of how some of these storylines are run. And it doesn't, I think there's plenty of evidence that people are looking for escape. They're looking for some fantasy. They're looking for kind of bigger than life entertainment. Comics should be doing much better, but it's kind of a holding down the fort kind of strategy that they have going on, not an expansion strategy, not a growth strategy. Now, maybe some of that changes, but it felt like the growth in the industry about 5 years ago really got fixated on this idea of, well, we'll just link ourselves up to a Netflix or somebody like that. Then we'll get these properties out on the screen, and that's where we'll make all the money. And that became the go-to strategy for a lot of companies. They're still doing it today, but I'm not sure there's as much money in that approach as people think. And I think it's clearly not driving up salaries. It's not driving up overall wealth inside of comics. And so you're going to continue to see people. I mean, put it this way: if you're an artist and you can meet a deadline, you can do fine work, you would be absolutely nuts not to go toward games or software or tech, where people coming right out of college are offered 80, 90K starting, plus benefits, plus bonus, plus stock. That's and as a secure job.
Well, and you see someone like Tony Daniel, who's one of the most prized artists in comics, and he keeps getting put on Batman. I mean, he's been put on Batman like 4 times in the last 2 years, and he always leaves. And I recently found out from a podcast, he's leaving to go do work for Hollywood because they pay more.
Sure. And seemingly, this was the comment I always remember from the interview with Brian Hill. He said it's easier to break into Hollywood. It's actually easier to get a job. It's easier to get work. It was harder.
Well, it is now. I think we're going to see a huge contraction over the next 2 years because of COVID.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, and this is all pre-COVID. The rules have changed, but what a crazy statement that, when things were healthy and normal, it was easier to get the higher paid job. I mean, it just goes back to, you'd be nuts not to go for that job. And maybe it's not your dream, but then again, if you can get a job and secure money and funding there and then go off and do your own things on the side, why wouldn't you do something like that? So maybe a route here just needs to be more avenues for people who are doing their own projects, who are doing, whether it's crowdfunding or their own web comics or their own personal things. What's the mechanism in place to help distribute them, help market them, help consolidate and guide people there? How does that mechanism come into play? And maybe that's really where the growth will take place, because right now it just seems like people are biding their time. It's the chat, by the way, had a whole sequence on heroes that could not feel pain.
I saw that and I was like, I don't really have comments because most of my heroes very much feel pain.
That was good. That was a good little thread there. There are some, and it has been described as a weakness before, that you feel no pain. In fact,
well, there was Kick-Ass. I mean, his quote unquote powers, he doesn't feel pain.
Right, but he'd get destroyed.
Exactly. I mean, he's just a normal dude outside of that.
Yeah, there's definitely been some in the past, and I think there's been some manga as well where it turns out to be a pretty big flaw because you get yourself into trouble you don't realize it. You're not.
I mean, if you look at real life, people with diabetes can't feel their extremities, and they get a small nick that no one would care about if you didn't have that disease that was destroying your nerves, and it gets infected, and you'll lose your whole arm or leg because it's just a paper cut.
Yeah, there's a storyline there. Anyway, there's a fascinating little segue there in the chat. What do you think? Oh, so okay, take Marvel and DC out of it, and for the moment, just to not cheat, let's take Image out of it as well.
I was about to say Image, but okay.
Who's putting out the best books, do you think?
Best books.
I mean, and I think it's a tough one because at the smaller level, you have some good content from a
Yeah,
number.
there's a lot of good stuff, and I'm a little biased because I'm going to say Dynamite because they're putting out Vampirella by Chris Priest, and he's just a phenomenal writer. But
Mhm.
I'm sure there's tons of other smaller companies. I mean, that TKO, they did
Yeah,
Sarah with Ellis and was it Epting and Breitweiser? I can't
yeah,
remember, but
that's right.
a
Yeah,
great book. And
that was
then, of course, Allegiant Arts, which is the Breitweiser's company. I don't like most of their books, but Nora's Saga by Blake Northcutt and oh shoot, what's his name? Butch Geis. I think
mm,
it's Butch Geis. Maybe he
yep.
was on a different one, but the sheer level of artistic talent on Allegiant Art is really good.
Yeah, I think TKO has some really solid books out there. They're flying a little bit under the radar. I think it's not necessarily perfect, but some of the stuff from AWA has been better than expected. I think, or A&A. I don't know what Artisans. It's a terrible name for a publishing company, actually. I think, but I don't know. I've had books that I've liked from IDW, from Boom, from Vault. I think there are lots of good books out there, and sometimes it depends on the month. The positive way to answer this is, I think a lot of the smaller publishers all have the capability of putting out some really good books, and that's a good thing. It just means that, if we can line them up with maybe some more promotion and the right people there, that
Yeah, like
that's
David Finch's wife Meredith. She did a book for Cave Pictures Publishing, which is sort of I don't know if they're a Christian company, but they're like a religious
I
focus
think
company, and they did an adaptation of George MacDonald's fantasy novel The Light Princess, which was actually one of my favorites growing up. So I jumped on that one. I subscribed immediately, and it had gorgeous art by Renee DeLise, who did The Legend of Wonder Woman. So there's a lot of great stuff from these tiny little publishers, but that book sold like 1,000 copies a month. It was so disappointing for the creative team. I met David Finch at a con last year, and he said that the sales were just so disappointing to them, and it deserved better. It was a great little book.
there is a big problem right now, I think, in just discoverability. And if I remember this problem very clearly when mobile got a thing, when the iPhone came out and we were starting selling apps there, and you have a lot of game companies coming in trying to put games on the device, and suddenly everything's flooded there, and discoverability became the big problem. How do we have a storefront that allows people to find things and recommend? And they still haven't fully solved that problem, but it feels like that's where comics are today. There's a huge barrier, especially for people who aren't the big two, to get your books known, to get them just in front of people. They know that they exist. And so a lot of really good talent is being put into some of these stories, but they're not breaking through that barrier where people know they're there. And unfortunately, like we saw today, angry tweets or outrage bait just sucks all the oxygen out of the room immediately. So you can line up a good promotional campaign, you can get things ready, and then if somebody decides they want to have a tantrum on Twitter, sorry, that's where all the attention is going to go for the next 3 days, and you're out of luck. You got to start over again. And that's a dangerous, kind of fragile place that the industry's at right now.
Yeah. And I think so much of what you've been saying on your videos about who you know and the clique atmosphere of comics, like there's so many books that I see by people who I know are just kind of mid-level writers, and it's not just that they're bad, but they're not that great, but they're friends with so many people that their friends who are big names just tweet about them, and I just say, I know why you're doing this, and I think that it's one of the reasons I don't like being friends with writers, because there's always this pressure for you to promote their stuff or you to give them feedback on their stuff. I'm just like, I just want to be friends with you,
Yeah. It is weird. I do notice this. There's, about, I don't know, not 50-50, but there's writers who will reach out and I'll chat and everything else, and it's just friendly. And then there's others that if I don't say anything about their book the week it comes out, I'm getting like a DM saying, "Hey, I noticed you're not talking about my book." It's like, sorry.
I just think that's not appropriate,
It's weird. Like, I mean, I don't have anywhere close to the audience to float your book. So you're aiming at the wrong guy. I mean, I'm glad. I'm very, very grateful for all the people in the chat here and listen to the video. And that's great. I still can't even begin to understand why there's people subscribed at all, but thank you. But if you're trying to make a book live and really kind of crack, I don't know, 50,000 copies a month plus, Like you're don't DMing people on Twitter is a terrible approach. That's like the worst, the slowest possible approach to making things happen. It's a very strange strategy. It's like there's a whole marketing component to comics that's just missing.
Yeah, and Chuck Dixon mentioned this on his Q&As, which are a great little thing that he does about marketing. Someone asked him, how are comics marketing? He said, they're not. Nobody knows how. Nobody can figure out how.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. So somebody's asked me to name names. I actually have a video talking about this coming up, but I'll tell you what, I'll do this. Here's other people I've interviewed. I have, Brett Booth has never reached out and asked me to promote his stuff. Neither has Murphy. Neither has any of the stuff that like Alana Smith has edited. Neither. I mean, I'll give names on all different fronts. Brian Hill never did this. There's a lot of people who have helped out. Like I've asked a question like, hey, what's going on? The solicitation for this Avengers book right here says TBD. Can you tell me who is really doing it? Because I'd like to order it. And I'll get a prompt to answer back. So I know I did the comment on a different show where I said, I think, Alana Smith's always been very nice to me. I know a lot of people have issues with her, but she's answered and been very professional in terms of she understands the relationship between you're trying to sell the book, so here's some information, and she's good about it. And then I don't get this nagging return of, so where's the promotion for my book? Why aren't you saying nice things? I don't get that. And definitely there are writers and editors and artists that do stuff like that. And I think I don't want to drag anybody, but in many cases you can tell, because if you just read the tweets, there's an insecurity that comes across even in the public stuff they do. So none of these people would be surprising to you, the ones that reach out. But Stacks asked this, an interesting question. Do you think Marvel intentionally shuffles artists on its titles to prevent them from gaining popularity? No, I don't think it's to prevent them from gaining popularity. I do think it's a absolute kind of Moneyball cost savings thing, though. I think that they move people around both because the scheduling is sometimes terrible and because they're trying to kind of squeeze every penny out of the budget that they have for books. So I think it's very much a strategy where you'll launch a book and you'll pay top dollar to get Alex Ross to do a cover for you. And then you'll have an upper B level artist do the first 3 issues, and you burn some budget there. And then you're going to stealth, go to issue number 4 and get somebody that you can get for $100 a page. And then you're going to run with that for a while. And when you see the numbers start to dip, maybe you bring somebody back in for a couple issues. It makes a little bit more, but it very much feels like a budgetary thing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true if you look at the pattern of publishing. But I mean, This is also complicated by the fact that comics, especially the big titles like Batman and Spider-Man, have been double shipping for 6 years or something like that. And that means that you can't have a top level artist on that book for more than, honestly, it's like 2 issues now. We were chatting about this on Twitter yesterday with Mariko Tamaki's new Wonder Woman run. And, a lot of people are very hesitant. And I admit, I was really hesitant too, because Tamaki's written a lot of stuff that I really don't like. And she's done a lot of, tweets that I just don't enjoy. I think she's kind of annoying sometimes, but she's a person. And I think she's developed a lot of skills. And so I checked out, I do reviews. So I checked out the most recent issue of Wonder Woman.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple things in there that are, the kind of stuff that we're afraid of, the slice of life, how's my hair look type stuff. But on the whole, it was a well-crafted book that built to a good cliffhanger, and it had a great concept for a run, and the solicitations look like they're really going to build on that idea. And I'm kind of excited about this now. And Mikkel Janin drew such a great book. It's a great Wonder Woman book, and he's on there for 2 issues because it's still double shipping. They couldn't just drop that book to once a month, have Janine be on it for 6 issues for a full arc, and then use your budget on a less expensive artist. I look at that and it's happening on Batman because that's double shipping. It's happening on just all these titles, and I hate it because you have these artists who could really make things that last, but instead, because of the demands of the double ship, you're making things that are just gonna drop in quality, and it's gonna hurt the rereadability.
It is, and I think it cuts in every direction. I mean, fans reading this stuff, they like consistency. And again, I do videos and then I post them, and then I don't know when I don't know if it's gone out or not. I think it's scheduled in the future, but I take a look at kind of historical, and you see when comics shuffle the creators around, particularly the artists, too rapidly, you see a definite drop in sales. It has a financial impact, and so you're saving money, and you're trying to kind of move things around, but it's not, the negatives far outweigh the positives financially. I mean, there's just proof that they do. And I think with Wonder Woman, so I'm very confused and continue to be confused with DC and Wonder Woman. They want that character to be a top flight character. You got a movie coming out, all good things. I think she can be a top flight character.
Absolutely.
Janin is had a good run coming off of Batman. Okay, not necessarily the top artist they have, but still solid. Nothing wrong with it.
If you put someone on Batman, that means DC considers them one of their top,
Right. I think absolutely. I think they're, it's in that realm where it's popular. But and you go to some pains promoting that you've got Janet on this book, and he's making some statements, and they do an interview and all the rest. And then, like you said, it's like 2 issues, and so that feels like a con game to a lot of fans. It feels like
and I don't think it's a con game. I don't think they're trying to deceive us. It's just the practical realities of it's doing it twice a month, and these books have to come out like after.
It is. And but I think they'll make less money than if they just shipped it monthly, or if they delayed by, have Orlando do 3 more issues or whatever it happens to be, and then get a run of Janin's work so you can at least go for a full like 6 to 12 issues. I mean, just you've got it. There's a number of ways to solve this problem, but I think, I had to laugh. I know it's not how it was intended, but I did love the statement of this title is going to show you how to fail. It's like, yeah, that's what everybody's afraid of. It is,
and I still think that's because he's a Spanish speaker, and I think
right. It wasn't what they meant, yeah. But
it was funny in phrasing. But I feel like I could read what he was saying.
Yeah, for sure. It absolutely is, and it was phrasing, and it was it definitely. But yeah. By the way, it's. I think that. I don't think it's as hard as the companies make it out to be to have a successful run. Maybe not a mega successful, like the best run of all time, but I think there's just some very basic, obvious things. Don't screw around with the shipping schedule. Have some consistent creative on it. Don't go for a double ship month and blow through a popular artist. I mean, the Avengers is actually a very interesting book to track, because the shuffle game they're playing with the artists on that book is just. It's all over the place, and it hurts the book. It's not Marvel's flagship title anymore, and it's coming off of the heels of a multi-billion-dollar movie. That's nuts.
Well, and the thing is, I know he's kind of, I don't know what he's out of favor, and I think perhaps justly so. But Warren Ellis did a great arc of Secret Avengers. I can't remember exactly. It was like between 2008 and 2015. Somewhere between then, he did a great arc, and it was 6 issues. Every issue had a different artist, but he did a great strategy of, it was one and dones that were all connected with little pieces. And I think if you had more writers who thought in those creative ways, so like a lot of writers are like, oh man, I have double ship, so I have to have 2 artists. Yep. I'm going to use one artist for flashbacks. And I think readers are smarter than that. We're like, okay, I get what you're doing with the flashbacks, but I know it's really because you're double shipping. I think if a writer was really smart, they would do something like what Warren Ellis did, which is focus each book around a different character. So each one of those one-shots was about a different character on the team, and it all built to a conclusion. Greg Rucka did a different thing in his Wonder Woman run, where he had 2 parallel storylines, and that's sort of the flashback thing. But I actually went back like 6 months ago. I read every other issue, so it was chronological, and all the artists were together, and he did a great job of everything lining up. So you could actually read it in chronological order, and it made perfect sense, or you could read it in numerical order, going back and forth, and each issue sort of played with an idea from the last issue. So if more writers were creative like that, I think readers are smart. I think they would respond to that.
I know. I absolutely think it's within the skill set. I think you have a problem where if the message today, not to be a broken record about it, but if the message today is, hey, writers, write with a 6-month window max in front of you, then strategy goes out the window. You're looking at just short-term little arcs. You're hoping to kind of make the right friends and maybe get the right kind of buzz for your short-term arc to hop onto another book, and that's as far as you think. And this question by Ben, do you think a strategy of better artists with longer runs on less titles would overall outsell a strategy of lesser artists with sporadic runs on more titles? Yes, I think there's math to prove it, and so I'll pull out the spreadsheets. There's concrete proof. I mean, Yule, who's in the chat, is a retailer. I'm sure he sees the same thing. It is absolutely the strategy. And what's interesting is like Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, which you mentioned earlier. I mean, that was insanely late in how.
Oh man, and Tom Brevoort was so just rude about that. People were like, "Why is this so late?" Which is a very reasonable question. And Brevoort said, "Well, every time you ask that, it gets later." I'm like,
yeah.
If you're saying that, just keep your mouth shut, dude.
He runs a masterclass on like how to not engage people. I don't want to. It's not my style of going too much and bashing people, but
that one was just so public,
Yeah, it's terrible. He puts his stuff out publicly. You're right, and it's that, and combined with there's a Twitter feed that puts out covers. It's like the spinner rack, I think is the name of the Twitter the user, and they put out basically on this day here are 4 comics that came out, and it's a fun little thing. It's good for nostalgia. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. I am old, and Brevoort will retweet and say, I didn't buy any of these proudly, and it's
why would you do that, dude?
Yeah, you could also just do nothing. Like you would be way better just doing nothing. Just don't tweet that.
Who does that help, man? That was like that Busick Twitter about that one old writer. I can't remember who he was, but he was one of the Silver Age guys who just wrote a ton of stuff, and he created Zatanna and stuff. And Busick just went off on a tear and said, "This guy sucks, and there's nothing redeeming." And I'm just like,
yeah, he's gone.
Who's gaining from this?
There is so much self-control that desperately needs to come in here. But that was, that is, again, it's public. So I mean, we talk about this stuff, but it's absolutely, and if your job is in part to be a good ambassador, a good evangelist for your comics, for the fans, you are nuts to then proudly talk about how you didn't buy your own company's products, and it's just weird. I didn't mean to go off on a run there, but it is nuts why that stuff goes on and why people are so proud about it. And this question here, is there a way to know which books are going to have long runs with the same creative team? Not really.
I mean, no. Even Batman, which always has very powerful writers, because of the double ship, you can't guarantee anything.
Yeah, it's and it is one reason I'll quit playing this theme, but it's one reason because a lot of people really kind of questioned me, and I got I think more mail than any other topic I've done. I'm not sure why. To her credit, this is a question I often ask Alana Smith, and she almost always answers with just data about here's what's going to happen, and factual data. And so I give her credit. I give her credit for that because I hope
that kind of stuff is gold. It's professional. It's courteous. Sure. It's useful.
I would encourage her to take it one step further. I don't know what kind of political things this will do inside your office, and start posting that stuff publicly and almost subtle shame the other editors who aren't doing that, because this is the stuff that, to the credit. Look at the second sentence here. I always hesitate to pick up new books, especially for the big two, because of this. This is how almost everyone thinks. And
I mean, I like Janine's art for this Wonder Woman issue. I don't know if I'm going to like the guy who's after him.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough way to go, and it's just self-defeating. You hate to see comics defeat itself, and that's the
absolutely. I think we all want to read more stuff that we love.
Yeah, it's a funny time. But so I wanted to ask you so quickly on San Diego Comic-Con. I've got some tickers running. See if anything's to react to. So DC going to do more YA comics? Do you care? Do you not care? What do you think?
I mean, DC is obviously going to keep doing YA comics because they really want that diversification of market.
Mhm.
And I think it's been working for them. One of the problems with the book market is it's super not opaque. I mean, one of the things that comic fans don't understand how spoiled we are and what we're about to lose because Diamond is the one that's so transparent. And for all its flaws, I do appreciate that they made sales figures available.
Yeah,
Is that we know how things are doing. Now, yes, there's approximations and overships, and I know that overships is this big contentious thing. I agree with what Perch has said. I think that it's overstated the effect it has.
for sure.
But the book market is not transparent. You do not know how they are selling. At best, you might know a ranking, but that doesn't tell you anything in terms of units sold, demographics, where it's being sold, whether it's Target or your comic shop, which does sell those books, or Barnes and Noble, or if it's through Amazon. You do not know. You don't have information. Now,
Right.
I'm hoping that DC is seeing these numbers because DC will have access to those numbers. But the way DC's handled the Diamond numbers makes me extraordinarily unconvinced that they're actually going to know what to do with the data that they have on their stuff.
It's curious. I'm curious to see the second quarter of DC. So we saw them kind of come out of the pandemic really aggressive, a lot of kind of lean forward behavior, and they're really trying to kind of seize the moment. And you saw, I mean, particularly like Snyder and Taylor, where there's almost this, you could feel this kind of almost behind the scenes coordination of trying to like, okay, let's go out real strong. And now that that's happened, we're into death metal. That's rolling. We have a couple other events that are happening. The Endless Winter event was announced today, which we can talk about in a moment. But it is, I'm curious to see the next step, because this is typically where DC tends to drop the ball. They had Rebirth, and it's that second quarter, that next step, that they seem to forget kind of what they're doing, and it goes haywire. So I'm hopeful they can keep this momentum, because I think a strong DC, being strong in the right way, not just because they're shipping 800 comics a week and flooding the shelves, but they're actually making positive business steps. I think then smaller companies can look at that and go, oh, that's how you do it. And then everybody grows, you would hope.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of people in my various communities, I'm part of like 5 or 6 different comics communities with very different demographics. And a couple of them are very angry with DC because the stuff that DC is doing with these new distributors is painful. It's painful to the local distributors, especially international ones, because of shipping. And I get that. But it isn't going to get better if you just stick with Diamond. And
No,
you don't know that it's going to get better by going with UCS and DCBS, but it has a chance where it did not before.
yeah. No, I think they got to try things. I think if you're trying things from a position of at least an intelligent guess, it doesn't mean you're going to win all the time, but it does. You definitely will fail if you do nothing. The status quo doesn't work. So I think that is there. This question now just popped in on kind of why I think the DC young adult versions are so different, not only to diversify fans, but to create trademark versions separate from the OG creators. Yes, I do. And this is a absolutely smart comment that a lot of people miss. I absolutely think it's an attempt to take, and it's a strategy you're seeing a lot in software and in other companies, where they take a core IP and then they just start to modify out the edges to the point that they can grow and grow and grow kind of the bubble around it. And it's a way to protect. It's a way to, certainly fish to see what will be popular, but it's all about, kind of keeping the money. And it definitely has an effect from the original creators. They can make claims that we don't owe you this license because we're doing this thing over here. It's definitely a business strategy, and I think that is absolutely what's going on here. What do you think?
Well, DC started their YA and young adult and juvenile fiction, but I've actually been more impressed with the juvenile fiction program because Black Canary Ignite and the Dustin Nguyen Little Gotham Project Once Upon a Crime they're just such cute books. I just loved them. Whereas the YA stuff tends to be a little more samey. It all has the same two-tone color art style. And it's all very YA in a kind of formulaic way.
Yep.
And so all of that stuff was based around their existing IP. But over the last, I'd say 6 months, they've really aggressively pushed into creating new IP. So you have your anti-hero, which is the two new heroes that are one's a hero, one's a villain, and they have a friendship. It's a fun, it's a trope, very tropey concept, but it seems energetic. You have your you just have a lot of different books that are clearly not DC's current IP. And I don't know if I think, obviously everything is designed to connect with an audience so they can separate the audience with their money. Like, this is a business, no problem with that. However, I am very curious to see how this turns out, because it feels like they originally were trying to see if they could replicate Smile and Captain Underpants with DC characters, and I don't think that worked as well as they'd hoped. It worked because they're still doing it, but it didn't have a runaway success. Like, I'd say DC Superhero Girls actually had a fairly runaway success because you had a lot of branded stuff together that was all sort of cohesive. And then that sort of petered off because they had a new creative direction, and I don't think that hit quite as hard. But I think now they're trying for let's see if we can get a big splash with these one-off, self-contained new IP, but sort of reminds you of DC properties stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I'm glad you brought up Superhero Girls, because if you look at the annual reports, you look at some of the numbers, that license was incredibly valuable. The merchandise and what they made off that was
money for like 3 years.
No, they did that. That made a lot more money than the comics. I mean, just bluntly, that outsold the top Batman and Superman comics, that merchandise line. And so when you get it right, you can make this all work. But it's an interesting take. Switching gears here real quick, and then I want to get your thoughts on some of the movies that are coming out. And for the people in the chat, probably if we can I keep you for about another 15 minutes, Ian? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right. We're out there. So bring in your questions and all that. I'm trying to peg these at an hour and a half. It's very easy for them to slip into. They can go forever because I just talk and talk. But thoughts on Scott Snyder's Justice League? How did you like it, or did you read it, and what did you think?
I did not like it. I thought that the art was phenomenal. And I think that it was very cool sometimes to see what he was going for. And he would often have amazing moments. I mean, everyone pulls out the triple punch with Pa Kent, Superman, and John all punching together. That is a moment that is transcendent.
It absolutely was. Yeah, that was a great moment.
But so much of it, and maybe I don't know if this is unfair. This is definitely my personal taste, but so much of it felt like Snyder was writing episodes of Magic School Bus. Ooh, we blew up the moon. Ooh, we're putting the moon back together. We're going to a new dimension, except everyone's evil in that dimension. And And the funny thing is, I don't actually hate those tropes. Like, I've enjoyed Young Justice, which has done a lot of the same stuff. Yeah. But the way Snyder does it, the stakes are so high, I know they're not going to fail. Like, there is no way that the universe will be destroyed in Death Metal. It just won't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we will put the toys back in the box by the time it's over, but it's tough, right? Because for those of you who remember, when Snyder got announced to do Justice League and Jason Aaron got announced to do Avengers, kind of at the same time, and there was a brief moment on Twitter where the two of them were going back and forth, and I loved it. They were kind of egging them on of like, who's going to have the better book, but it was friendly. It didn't feel like two companies, messing with each other. It felt like we were going to get a good, healthy rivalry between the two major companies and the two major teams, and they were going to push each other to see who could out-concept the other. That was the moment, and it was exciting. I remember people coming into the shop at that point excited. They wanted to kind of buy both, and so I mean, as a retailer, I'm like, yes, buy both. I'm on board with this plan. Keep fighting. But then when it rolled out, it felt like. I mean, to me, Snyder's Justice League, it felt like it always needed a guidebook or something on the side. When it first came out, they were doing things, and I remember questioning myself, like, am I getting dumber over time? Because I'm not tracking this storyline like I should. And in one cases, they're doing these tropes like you're talking about that are very kind of standard, very typical stories. But then they've got the Perpetuous bit, and they were building up to a lot of this stuff, and it felt like it was missing. I always felt like it was missing an issue to tie it together. About every 6 issues, there was just something that was not tying these things together, and so as a result, it kind of had these jumping arcs. I think there were good ideas in there, but it always felt like it was missing something. And so now we get to death metal. And I've talked before about how there was a weird, like, he set up the year of the villain, but it felt like half the writers in DC didn't go along with it. So it almost felt like he was having to drag it along, and it didn't have the wine light impact that I think it should have. And I don't know if that's the editors or Didio or what was going on there. But then now we have death metal, and you're right. I mean, we know that the heroes are going to make it out of this. We know that they're going to save the day in the end, and that takes some of the stakes away. And I feel like this is something Marvel and DC has kind of done to themselves. They've made it so you know that, the shocking death is not really going to be the shocking death. And it I don't know, it tempers a little bit. It's tough because I see him and I see Aaron, for that matter. They're out swinging for the fences, but there's always feels like something missing.
Let's go back to one of the biggest events that DC's done, not just biggest in terms of impact, but biggest in terms of what the editors had to do to get it to work. And I'm talking about No Man's Land.
Yeah.
In No Man's Land, you had dozens and dozens of writers, probably close to 50 different artists, working together for a year on well over 200 titles. And sure, some of those were very variable. It didn't always hold together, but I think most people look back on No Man's Land and say that was a story that mattered. And I think one of the reasons it mattered is because, yes, we all knew that Gotham was going to go back to being a city, but we wanted to know how, because it was a very difficult problem for Batman and the writers to solve. So the how was really important. Whereas I feel like the way Snyder has written Justice League, it's not really how, is what kind of scientific nonsense can I make up to solve this problem? It doesn't feel like it's something that the heroes have to solve so much as a way for Snyder to make up a new solution. Whereas putting the city back together had, you had the war strategy of the military moving to take positions. You had the character strategy of the troops having to work together and the breakups between allies and stuff. And another thing that I think is really a problem in superhero comics is the civilian population. So many characters today are superheroes. They don't have civilian supporting cast. They don't have characters who can truly be hurt by these titanic events. Because if you kill off Superman or Batman or even Hawkwoman or the Atom, all those characters will come back because comic book death is a trope. But in No Man's Land, and spoilers for a 20-year-old comic, Jim Gordon's wife gets killed and she hasn't come back. And that actually really hurts for me. I don't like that ending of that, but it mattered. And that's because they had a civilian supporting cast. They had people who actually mattered to the main characters who wouldn't be who wouldn't come back. And I think that superhero comics have really lost that. Like the closest you get is someone like Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, and they're not going to kill Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen because people love them too much. And nobody wants to read the death of Lois Lane. I mean, you had the Tom King comic where he killed off Lois Lane because Superman was worried about it. And I originally had a negative reaction to that comic, but I think rereading it, I can really see what he's going for. It's a husband a long way away who's really worried about his wife. But the intensity of the reaction against that shows that nobody wants to see Lois Lane die. Nobody wants that. So nobody's going to do it. So there's a protective shield around her.
No, it's true. I think that, and part of the pushback I think we get is I think nobody wanted to see Tom King kill off Lois Lane. I think Tom King has a lot of ideas about how to make these civilian characters work. I think if you go way back to Vision, I think that he understood these dynamics and how to make them all play. And it sometimes feels like either he's saddled with an editor who's not reining him in, or he's letting kind of the despair run the show. I mean, the balance gets off. And then some of the things he's going for, like that moment with Lois was, I mean, he did read like a superhero snuff comic, but it's still, it was designed to instill the fear in Superman of kind of what was going on and this attachment. And that wasn't a bad idea at all. It just didn't play out quite right. And I think that's where a lot of these comics, it feels like, and maybe it's what you said earlier, it's that they're just rushing it too much, or they're trying to just shove things out the door faster than maybe they're capable of or should. And it's hurting. It's hurting maybe some good ideas that are buried underneath the surface that just aren't coming out.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. And I think a lot of it is that a lot of writers aren't able to think through and plan ahead in a lot of ways. You know, they're just, and I get it. I'm not a writer, but I've done a bit of creative writing, and I know trying to scrounge your brain for ideas and making it work, it's hard work. And I don't begrudge writers their paychecks. No. Even the ones I don't enjoy. I think that they do try to work hard. Most of the time.
It's hard. And especially if you're, if in the midst of having to write these stories, you have no long-term job security, you have no health insurance, you are paid, less than a lot of your peers. The background kind of socialization of comics is in many cases so toxic that
it's so unhealthy.
Yeah. I mean, if you offend the wrong person or don't pay the right attention, then you've got people coming in from the side at you. You've got writers who are trying to defend their turf in a comic company. I mean, horrible stories about your writers who are trying to steal projects from other writers. And it just all of those dynamics, none of that encourages good creative writing.
No.
So it's kind of like this. By the way, thanks for the comment here. This is just me, had a glass of whiskey and wanted to do something funny. So I put together the kind of fails and put some comic book logos on them. But sometimes I feel visualization is the fastest way to kind of communicate some of this stuff. And that's where a lot of things in comics feel. It's like, hey, they've got something going here. It can't possibly go wrong. But then the person's going to jump right off the cliff. And it's just a shame. Anyway, by the way, if anybody, if there's a particular video or topic or theme or something that you like that I do, let me know, because I'm always in on all that kind of stuff. Hopefully the audio is overall trended a little bit better for people. So, hope that's good. Should be good right about now, other than maybe a little echo. But I think, let me ask you this. So you're a fan of Tom King's work, and this is a comment that keeps coming up. And I want to ask this. So at what point, whether it was the Dean Cain thing a couple weeks ago or whatever, or the Jay Lee thing today, how does this impact you? And I think a lot of people on Twitter will be quick to say, hey, seeing the way that people behave on social media, it turns me off. I can't read the book anymore. I object. I'm removing it from my pull list. But where do people have to go? If you're a fan of somebody, like you like Christopher Priest, I believe, quite a bit. Mm-hmm. At what point does it cross a line that you can't separate the work from the artist? Or does it ever cross a line for you?
Oh, it definitely crosses a line. And there's a reason I don't actually follow Tom King or James. Actually, I do follow James Tynion because he's actually fairly disciplined on Twitter. Sure. But let's actually go back.
Yeah.
James Tynion is one of my favorite writers. I don't actually read his indie stuff just because I'm not interested in most of what he writes in indie, because it tends to be either horror or just kind of not my thing. But I love the stuff he's done for DC. He got involved in a comic book fight with some of the Comicsgate people, and it was right before a con that I was going to go see him, and he was very angry, and I understand why. I don't agree with him, but I understand. I mean, the Comicsgate people were really harassing him, and but it made me feel really uncomfortable, uneasy about, lining up to talk to him. And thankfully I did. And I was able to, separate that. And we had a really good interaction because he's really warm at cons. He's such a nerd, and he's younger than I am, which infuriates me because he's been writing Batman since he was like 25. And I'm, a couple years older than him, and I've never written anything. And, but it does really affect you. You do have these things because people are people, and it is a relationship you have, even if it's just through tweets or even just through the words they write. And so when someone does something that's the equivalent of a temper tantrum,
sure,
it makes you feel kind of unsafe. And I have to admit, I think, I'm a huge fan of Tom King's writing, and I've had really good personal interactions with him at cons. Mm-hmm. But I've been really turned off by his tweeting, and part of that's I'm a conservative person, politically and personally. And I feel like Tom King, because of, our current president and the current situation and being locked up so much, I mean, people are just going nuts. But I feel like he's letting his anger, he's throwing temper tantrums, and I don't think that's safe. And I have expressed that even though I love his Batman, I love his Omega Men and his Vision, and I'm very excited about his Bat Cat, I'm very worried about his Rorschach, because I feel like he's been saying things like, I'm a very angry person, and this is going to be a very angry book, and it's going to show what to do with your anger. And it seems like what he's doing with his anger is swearing at people he disagrees with on Twitter. And I don't think that's...
Yeah, I don't want
a book of that,
I'm with you. It's tough because I've met Tom King many times. He is nice and cheerful and sociable, and it is in person. Yeah. And you see this
fans,
stuff.
He's very humble, and the first thing he says to every fan who walks up is, "Thank you for coming and reading the books." Like, he's very grateful.
Absolutely, a lot of people.
And that's a great thing.
It is, and it makes it puzzled. So this is where maybe there's different views on things. I come home and then I turn on the computer and I see this stuff, and I'm just puzzled and maybe a little sad, but mostly just puzzled more than anything, because it's like, well, you know what to do, you know how to engage people, you know how to kind of, you have these emotions. I don't think you're faking it at the con. I think there's some genuineness there. You couldn't fake it that long, maybe you're just a completely hollow person, but I don't believe that's the case.
I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, and I've never met someone who's had a bad experience with King at a con,
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's consistent. I think it's pretty consistently positive. And so I come on, I see this stuff, and I'm puzzled, because I'm like, why? You know what to do. Why are you doing that? This is self-destructive behavior. I see it very much in that realm. I don't get that knee-jerk kind of angry reaction. Now, I've got creators, and yes, to people who say name names, I got a video coming up. I named the name because I think this is fair game, where I've booked them or they've agreed to come to the shop, do signings, and then they no-show and run off with cash in some cases. So those people stick in my craw. I have an angry reaction when I see them online, and I know exactly why. I think it's easy to go.
Yeah.
But with King and some of these, it's just kind of honestly, it's like a sad feeling for me, because I don't get why they can't just follow their natural instinct, which is in there. It's weird to me, but anyway, it's nuts. And by the way, I want to bring up this comment because I think it's a good one that people say. It's this responding to people who call us Nazis is not harassment. He's right, by the way. I think if somebody is attacking you or calling you names or slandering you, or putting you into a bucket unfairly, which is a lot of, at this point, anyone who's throwing these kinds of labels around, to me, I view it as very lazy. It means I don't have the time or energy to really describe what I have a problem with. Instead, I'm going to just throw Nazi at it, because that's, shorthand for I don't want to do the mental work to think about it. Where the harassment does come in, because I've sat at a con with a creator who got mentioned by one of the bigger names, and then just watched the phone blow up with 200 tweets or ats, or bombing kind of the tweets, which is that is it. Harassment is too loaded of a word, but forget about harassment for a moment. That is bad behavior. It's mobbing.
Well, here's what I would say to this thing. And I was very upset with what King said about this is a hate group. Now, my relationship with Comicsgate is very complicated. I used to be really into talking to a lot of the people, but as a lot of the personalities have grown more into the backbiting and immaturity and just fighting on Twitter, I don't enjoy it anymore. And I don't agree with a lot of the stuff they're trying to do. But I know for a fact, because I talk to a lot of them, that they're complicated people. And to say they're part of a hate group is, as you say, it's a lazy thing. But the response to that should be, no, we're not. That's wrong. That's a lazy thing. What they get instead is, you're fat, you're bald, you're ugly, that's not a legitimate response.
You're right. But to be fair, it's not everyone. I do think that
it's not, but it is people.
It is. And I think that there's a handful of people who really enjoy the action of the drama. And so they will be the ones who mob. And then kind of, because we're on two sides with everything, a lot of people kind of get drug along behind that. And it's a shame because I do, as I've said in videos before, I think you go back to Doug Ernst and kind of some of the original things with Comicsgate, it was like comics are too expensive. There needs to be better marketing promotion. There needs to be better conduct, which if you've watched the last month of stories of bad conduct at cons, that's not a crazy idea. So it is, and we'll keep going with this. So you're right to this comment. Getting ratio because they said something stupid is not harassment. So let's take out the word harassment out because that's way too loaded. I think that if everybody bombed, and I'm not saying like somebody posts something stupid and then 100 people all come in and reply. I'm talking over the next 3 days, every single tweet the person writes, people come in and use the same insults and just keep grinding that axe over and over and over. At some point, the people doing that should also move on. Like it's you don't need to continue to bring up the same point over and over and over. And I think it's the same thing when you have people who are trying to kind of figure out their way and do the right things, and then a mob comes after them and they get caught in the middle, and so they try and work it out. I think this is what happened with Murphy with the Doug TenNapel situation. And so then you've got a small group of people, again, not representative of the entire Comicsgate or any of that, just a small group of people who then every time Murphy would post, come in with you bent the knee. And it's like, dude, okay, you say your piece once, twice, 5 times. I mean, by the time you're on the 20th time, you're also nuts. So, I mean, it's, I think this is probably a good comment here. There are always folks on both sides who want to troll and outrage. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And yes, it is the slur people always like to use. And it is, I think maybe that's the good summary. It is a lazy slur. I hate it. I think that it doesn't take much effort to be specific about what you're talking about. And I wish more people would just do that. But anyway, here, you brought this up. This is a good one to actually end on. So please, if people want, bring some more questions in, but we should probably call it a day. I need to go in and start drinking. It's time. Guys, are there any family...
Where's the Patron?
I need my Patron. I am desperate for it. Any family-friendly comics you would recommend? And yes, family-friendly varies by person. So what do you think? Is there anything kind of all ages that you would recommend?
Oh my goodness, so many. I love all ages comics. I just mentioned one a few minutes, maybe half an hour ago now. The Light Princess by Meredith Finch, drawn by Renee DeLise, put out by Cave Comics. It's an adaptation of a young adult novel by George McDonnell. Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane by Sean McKeever and Takashi Miyazawa. It's a great anime-influenced, just a romance comic about, and Mary Jane Watson is the main character. It's a reimagining in high school, but it's really well written. Just it works on a level that a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, and a 10-year-old can all really appreciate. Landry Walker's Supergirl Adventures in the, I want to say 9th grade. I could be wrong. Maybe 7th grade, but it's just that just got reprinted, and so Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane, and that's just a fantastic little high school adventure of Supergirl. Great sense of humor. I mentioned Black Canary Ignite by Princess Diaries author Meg Cabot and illustrated by Kara McGee. A really fantastic honoring of Black Canary's Golden Age and Silver Age history combined with the modern New 52 Black Canary. She's in a band. Like, I have never seen something that's that good at synthesizing the past and the present. It's so good and it's so cute. Dustin Nguyen's Lil Gotham is always delightful. Sholly Fish, most of the stuff he's on is tie-ins for kids, but it's almost always really well crafted. So if his name's on something, it's almost always going to be appropriate and really fun.
Those are some great recommendations. You listed several of mine in there. There's some really great ones, and I think it takes more work if you're a parent to do it. But if you want to go into manga, if you want to go into the Shonen Jump stuff, there are quite a lot of books there that are perfectly reasonable for family friendly comics. They're definitely, and it depends again, like your definition. This is well said. Your definition of family friendly may vary. I'm comfortable having my now 7 and 9-year-old read and enjoy One Piece. They enjoy it. There's definitely some fan service stuff in there and some violence that other people might be turned off of, but generally it does work with those themes of, I would say, family friendly. It's weird to kind of explain One Piece as family friendly, but I think that there's, again, your mileage may vary, but there's a lot there that's good. Those are great recommendations there, Ian.
And so much of what family friendly is about your family. And I don't think you should just hand kids books. I think you should read with them. If they're old enough, then you don't have to read it to them, but read along with them and chat with them about what they like. I mean, that's what my parents did. It's what I do with my younger siblings. So much of family friendly isn't just about what, doesn't have sex or violence or language. It's about what you can talk about in a useful and productive way with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of those criteria is too is it going to unlock their imagination? So one of the reasons why I've enjoyed One Piece with my kids is that they finish reading a piece, or with the younger one, I'm reading some of it to her, and then they're going off and they go out into the yard and they play as those characters. I find them drawing kind of the characters. It sparks other parts of their imagination, and I think that's, to me, that anything that kind of can tie the family together and provide that interaction is awesome. And I think that is building the next generation of comic readers, which is why hopefully more companies can get back on it. So, hey, I said that was the last one, but here's one last one to end on, because this is a good one. Again, I want to thank everybody and thank Ian for spending so much time with us here. Thank you for doing this. I've really enjoyed talking. So people may not know, by the way, that kind of four, I would say. So Ian is one of the 4 people who was why I started a channel in the first place. So thank you, Ian. You're responsible. Between you and Larry, Glenn, and Borbach, you're the 4 that really kind of pushed me to do it. So thank you.
Well, there's a reason I pushed, because I knew you'd bring insight, and I have been so just enriched by your commentary over the last 2 years. So I'm so excited to have been able to chat with you in person. Well, over the line, but
yeah. Well, thank you. It's the same. It goes both ways. And I say this on videos. I always think that people, I've heard people message saying, "Oh, you don't need to say that." But the comments that come, the vast majority of comments that come in the videos are excellent. I learn a lot from all of you. I love that interaction. In fact, in many ways, it's defeating, because I've gotten some emails from people talking about topics, and they write like 5 pages of the most well thought out, I mean, in a good way, well thought out topics. And I like, crap, I don't even know how to respond to this. It's just, I want to just go actually start a video and just read your mail, and then I'm done. It's really good stuff. I think that I'm lucky. I look at some of the other videos, some of the comments that go on there. I mean, I'm very lucky to have the people I have. So thank you. I mean it. This is a good one to end on. So Ian, what book are you most looking forward to 2021?
I mean, we don't have 2021 solicits yet.
Right.
I'd probably still say Batman Catwoman by Tom King, just because I think he's so good at those 12-issue miniseries, and Clayman's art is really a plus for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only one I really know about. I don't know what's lasting to 2021 at this point.
Fair enough. I'm interested to see the X-Men fall apart. I think in 2021 we're going to see whatever this second act is, where it all blows up. And so I'm interested to see how Hickman does the blow up. Maybe out of morbid curiosity, but I'm very curious about that. I'm also very curious to see what Brett Booth is going to do. He's going to do some creator-owned thing, I hear. So I'm anxious to see what that pulls out. And I think there's a lot of good. I'm hearing a lot of good ideas around the table, and I'm looking forward to kind of a lot of different projects. I think comics is an interesting space right now, where it would be fairly easy within 2 to 3 months for almost any comic to be a great comic if you put the right attention and creative team on it. So I'm just hoping some of that will happen. Hope springs eternal. There you go.
Of course.
Anyway, thank you very much, Ian. I really appreciate you joining. And you can follow. I don't know what I should do. You follow Ian on Twitter if you would like to. You should. Here you go. That's where he's at. I recommend it. And always good to talk to you. Always good to talk to people who have very different opinions. I really like the way you have debated with you. You like Tom King, but you're not calling people crazy. It's like a normal way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, I was so hopeful when you were talking about doing a YouTube channel, because that's exactly what you provide, is space and your own way of talking about things you love and things you really don't like, but you're always willing to talk. And that's what so many people aren't willing to do these days. And so I'm glad that
we've got to talk more to each other. It's that, especially now in today's climate, that's the only way we work things out. So anyway, thank you to everybody for joining. Very, very humbled, and I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.